Andrew Harper slowly stirred his cooling coffee at a corner table in a small Tampa cafe. Outside, a fan lazily spun, blowing the hot Florida air. Andrew glanced at his watch. 5 minutes until the meeting, but he was already there, nervously. "You're too nervous," his friend Mark, sitting across from him with a glass of iced tea, chuckled. "It's just a date, and you're shaking like you're at a job interview." Andrew smiled tensely. "I haven't dated anyone for a long time. I've forgotten what it's like to see someone you really like online for the first time." Mark nodded understandingly. He had heard Andrew tell the story many times before about how he had met a woman named Jade on a dating site. According to Andrew, they had been texting each other day and night for the past few weeks. For the 39-year-old software developer who was more used to communicating with computers than with people, this in itself was an event. And now, finally, they had agreed to meet in person. "Just be yourself," Mark supported, patting his friend on the shoulder. "She obviously liked you since she asked to meet herself. Everything will be fine." Andrew took a sip of his now cold coffee. His heart was pounding. Just be yourself was easier said than done, he thought. Jade's profile kept popping into his head. Cheerful, energetic girl, loves to travel and meet new people. Her photos radiated a warm smile and a zest for life. Was she really interested in a quiet person like me? Suddenly, the doorbell rang melodically, and a slender brunette entered the cafe. Andrew immediately recognized her, Jade. She looked around, noticed him, and smiled, heading towards the table. Andrew stood up to meet her, feeling how his palms were sweating. "Hello," Jade said, her voice soft and slightly hoarse. "You must be Andrew?" "Yeah, right? Jade, it's really nice to finally meet you," he managed to say, trying not to show his embarrassment. They exchanged an awkward hug. Mark stood up tactfully. "I won't disturb you." "Nice to meet you, Jade." Mark smiled and winked at Andrew. "I was just about to leave." Andrew nodded gratefully to his friend, realizing that he had come along specifically to provide him with moral support until Jade arrived. Mark headed for the exit, leaving the two of them alone. Jade sat down across from Andrew, brushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Up close, she was even more beautiful than in the photo. Large green eyes, delicate features, and a confident smile. "I'm glad you came early," she said. "I was a little nervous. It's always scary to go meet someone you met online." "Yes, of course," Andrew nodded, feeling the tension gradually ease. "But it seems to me like we've known each other for a long time. After all, we've been chatting so much." Jade smiled. "Exactly. It's like I know you. We've discussed everything from your favorite movies to your passion for technology." Andrew perked up. "By the way, I remember you said that you don't understand much about programming, but you're interested in listening." "Yes, that's true," she laughed. "I've always wondered what exactly a developer does. Are you talking about your project?" She looked at him with genuine interest. Andrew felt much more confident. He began to talk about his work on the new application, trying to explain it more simply, and joked about boring calls with colleagues. Jade laughed at his jokes in the right places and asked questions. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Half an hour later, Andrew realized that he wasn't nervous at all. They discussed his work, then moved on to her life. Jade told him that she was originally from Florida, grew up in a small town near Miami. Now she lives alone, recently moved to Tampa for a new job doing marketing for a travel services company. Andrew listened with bated breath. He liked literally everything she said. It turned out that she also loved science fiction, like him, and adored Italian cuisine. It was getting dark outside the cafe window. It was getting dark. They hadn't even noticed how time had flown by while they were talking. Finally, the waitress reminded them that the cafe would be closing soon. Andrew was surprised when he looked at his watch. They had been talking for almost 3 hours. "I wouldn't mind continuing," he said sheepishly, paying for their order. "Maybe we should go for a walk. It's such a warm evening." "With pleasure," Jade smiled. They walked out of the cafe onto a quiet street already lit by lanterns. A cool breeze from the bay was refreshing after the heat of the day. Andrew and Jade walked side by side, shoulders almost touching, and the conversation continued now about childhood memories and dreams. At the door of her house, where he took her, they hesitated for a second. Andrew felt a slight tremor. He didn't want to part. "I really enjoyed this evening," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "Me too," she replied, a warm light in her eyes. "I had a great time, Andrew." There was a short pause. Then Jade kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Shall we call each other tomorrow?" "Of course," he smiled happily. "Good night, Jade." "Good night, Andrew." She disappeared through the door, waving at him one last time. Andrew stood on the porch for a few more seconds, feeling his heart overflow with joy. He found himself thinking that, for the first time in many years, he was truly happy. As he walked home, plans for the next meeting were already spinning in his head. He couldn't wait to see Jade again. On the way, he dialed Mark, unable to keep his emotions inside. "Mark, it was amazing. We talked for hours, and I think I'm falling in love." On the other end of the line, the friend laughed joyfully. "I told you, everything will be fine." "Well, good luck. I'll wait for details tomorrow at work." Andrew hung up, smiling to himself in the dim light of the street. It seemed almost unbelievable that a woman like Jade would notice him, but now he believed that something special was waiting for him. This evening was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Andrew walked home at night, his steps light, as if the ground had softened. Snippets of his conversation with Jade swirled in his head. Her infectious laughter when he told him about his high school obsession with robotics. Her surprise when he shared that he had only recently flown to Florida for the first time, just for a new job. He remembered her telling him about her first trip to Disneyland and how she still had a stuffed animal from an old carnival that she kept. When he got home, he couldn't fall asleep for some time. The small apartment seemed unusually cozy, and every object suddenly reminded him of their conversation today. He sat down at the laptop, but instead of watching the news, he opened a chat with Jade. His fingers hovered hesitantly over the keyboard. Should he write? Wasn't it too intrusive? He smiled at his own hesitation and sent a short message. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. It was very easy and interesting with you. Good night." A couple of minutes later, the phone vibrated quietly. A reply came. "I really enjoyed it too. Good night, Andrew. See you tomorrow." Only then did he finally allow himself to turn off the light and lie down. In the darkness of the room, his eyes lingered for a long time. He replayed the details over and over. The tone of her voice, her gestures, the way she squinted when she recalled her school days. He saw her silhouette in the streetlights as they walked along the waterfront. He remembered how she stopped to watch a fisherman haul in his catch, curiously asking him about the seafood in Tampa, and how she had suddenly admitted that she liked to walk at night because there were fewer people and you could feel the true breath of the city. When sleep finally overtook him, he woke up early the next morning, excited about the day ahead. Andrew usually kept a bit of a low profile at work. But this time, when he walked into the office, Mark was already waiting for him, 2 cups of coffee on the table. "Well," Mark raised his eyebrows, taking a sip. "You called yesterday and said everything was great, but there were zero details. I was in agony all night, honestly." Andrew laughed and sat down opposite. "I thought you'd kill me if you woke me up in the middle of the night." He sighed, then began, "Look, it was even better than I expected. We actually talked for 3 hours, Mark, and it wasn't forced. She's amazing, smart, funny. She listened to me. She was genuinely interested." "So what's she like?" Mark leaned forward, as if catching every word. "Is she like in the photo in real life?" Andrew nodded, his eyes shining. "Better. The pictures don't do justice to the way she moves, the way she looks. And her voice, it's a little hoarse when she laughs." He noticed Mark smirking and quickly added, "Don't laugh. I'm in the middle of a romantic moment here, and you're like a teenager at a school party." Mark raised his hands in surrender. Okay, I'm serious." He thought for a moment and said, "So what next? Did you agree to meet again?" "We decided to call each other today." Andrew looked away, then couldn't resist admitting, I didn't want to push it, but I have a feeling this is the beginning of something important. I just don't want to scare it off. Don't be afraid to seem boring, Mark said, and this time his voice was softer. You're closed enough as it is. If she's already seen the real you and she likes you, then just be yourself. And yes, invite her to something interesting. Maybe go to the beach. She loves the ocean, right? That's a good idea. Andrew shook his head as if to shake off the tension. You know, when we were walking yesterday, she was telling me that she wanted to drive around the country in an RV someday. Said she wanted to see sunsets in different states. I, I've never met anyone who is so open about their dreams. Oh, help, the romantic has woken up, Mark chuckled, but then became serious. And what did you tell her? Andrew shrugged. I shared that I used to dream of working for NASA. I wanted to program spaceships, but then I got scared of the responsibility. He smiled and added, she said that it's not too late. You can always strive for your dream, and that sometimes you need to take a step towards the unknown. Mark clapped his hands loudly. Wow, philosophy is coming. Anyway, I like this girl. She makes you think, and that's already a success. The day passed more quickly than Andrew had expected. Each task became easier, his thoughts humming encouragingly. You'll hear her voice again today. In between, he found himself rereading their old texts, smiling as he remembered her jokes about people's strange habits on the subway. In the evening, when he returned home, he dialed Jade's number. His heart was beating persistently again, like the day before. Her pleasant voice sounded almost immediately. Hi, Andrew. How was your day? Excellent. He answered sincerely. And you? That's not bad either, she said. I've been thinking about our walk all day. There was the same warm sincerity in her tone that had won him over so much. And they started talking again, as if the night had never ended. They discussed a variety of things. Their favorite books. Jade confessed that she loved choreography and had taken dance lessons as a child. Andrew told them about his boss, who collected cacti. They argued about who made the best pizza, small mom and pop places, or big chain restaurants. Jade laughed when she heard that Andrew wanted to be a rock musician in school, but chose programming because guitar was harder than Python. Andrew listened with interest as she described her last holiday in Cuba, where she learned to snorkel and saw sea turtles. At some point, Jade suddenly became serious. Listen, why did you even decide to look for someone online? She asked. You don't seem like the type of person who can't meet people in real life. Andrew hesitated, then admitted, probably because of work. I spend too much time on the computer, and, he paused, choosing his words. You know, after my last relationship, I think I started to doubt myself. It was painful, and I closed myself off. Online for me is a way to learn to trust people again. He exhaled, as if throwing off a weight. And you? Well, I've always been pretty open, Jade said, but the idea of dating online was weird. And then I got curious. And to be honest, her voice softened, I'm glad I tried it. With these words, their conversation took a new direction. They were no longer simply exchanging facts, but sharing real experiences. Andrew felt a thin but strong thread of trust forming between them. When they agreed to meet up for the weekend to go to the beach and watch the sunset, Andrew realized that this wasn't just a series of casual conversations. This was a connection that was slowly developing into something more. He was about to hang up when Jade suddenly added, Andrew, she pleaded, don't be afraid to tell me about yourself. It's really important to me. I want to know what you're like when no one else is looking. The words echoed in his soul. He felt that for the first time in a long time, someone really wanted to understand him, and he was ready to open up. Thank you, Jade, he replied quietly. I'll try. They said goodbye, wished each other good night. Andrew put the phone down, and suddenly his own laughter rang out in the silence of the apartment's joyful light. He realized that he was beginning to trust not only her, but himself. And this filled him with a surprising, calm confidence that he had not felt for a long time. A few weeks passed. Andrew's life was transformed. It had a new meaning and joy, his relationship with Jade. They saw each other almost every day, and Andrew seemed to be flying on wings. He caught himself smiling while looking out the subway window, humming old songs for no reason, forgetting to close the tab with the code and looking at the phone screen, waiting for her message. His colleagues joked, noticing how he absent-mindedly smiled while sitting at the computer. "No problem, Mr. in the clouds, the code will write itself." The project manager nodded, smiling as she passed by. "Sorry," Andrew muttered, quickly returning to the task at hand. "It's just, well." He shrugged, and everyone understood. Someone in the room whistled softly. On weekends, he couldn't be dragged out to his usual game of bowling with his friends. He spent all his time with her. Mark, their permanent captain, tried to tug at his sleeve a couple of times. "Listen, I have nothing against love, but we're losing the tournament without your strikes," he joked. "I'll come next time, I promise," Andrew said, but in his head, he was already planning a route to Jade's house. One evening, Jade invited Andrew to her house for dinner. He arrived with a bouquet of roses and a bottle of good wine, a little nervous, like a boy on his first date. She greeted him at the door with a light kiss, the scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of garlic and white wine. Jade's apartment was cozy and stylish. Wooden floors creaked like home, and the shelves were filled with psychology books, landscape photographs, and old film cameras. A vinyl record collection sat on a shelf in the corner of the living room, alongside Sinatra and Florence plus the machine. Framed photographs lined the walls, mountains, city streets, an abandoned lighthouse. The room glowed softly from a lamp made of woven vine branches. It smelled delicious. Jade was making her own seafood pasta. "Make yourself at home," she smiled, accepting the flowers. Her eyes sparkled with joy, as if she herself had been waiting for this meeting all this time. "I have almost everything prepared. Do you like white or red?" Andrew looked around a little awkwardly. He noticed a painting of a woman in red silhouetted against the ocean and a stack of vintage National Geographic magazines. "It's very cozy here, and it smells delicious. Do you need help with anything?" He felt like both host and guest, trying to find his place in her space. "We can just open the wine," Jade said from the kitchen, where the clink of knives was coming from. "The glasses are over there in the cupboard, and the corkscrew is in the top drawer." Andrew found the glasses and deftly uncorked the bottle, though the cork was stubborn at first, causing him to blush and laugh. A few minutes later, they were sitting at a small table for two in her cozy dining room, candles lit for mood. The evening was deepening outside, and her hair shone copper in the candlelight. On the table was a deep plate of fettuccine with shrimp and mussels, sprinkled with fresh basil and parmesan. The aroma was a mingling of garlic, wine, and cream. "I didn't even know you were such a good cook," Andrew admitted, savoring his pasta. "Seriously, this is better than any Italian restaurant I've ever been to." "There's a lot you don't know about me," Jade laughed, and, catching his eye, added, "like how I used to watch Hell's Kitchen for hours and dream of moving to Tuscany. And," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "how I've never failed a chemistry test because I knew how to mix ingredients properly." She said it playfully, but Andrew suddenly caught a strange intonation in her voice, as if there was something deeper hidden behind the gentle irony, a hint that her past was like a multi-layered cake, not so easy to crack. But the next moment, Jade was already gently touching his hand and adding, "For example, I never told anyone, but at school I dreamed of becoming a chef. My father said that my happiness was in freedom, and freedom, in his opinion, is given by hands with which you can create." "Really?" Andrew smiled, shaking off his momentary anxiety. "Well, you have talent. This is the best fettuccine I've ever had, although my mother used to make something similar when she was in the mood to impress." "I'll have to meet your mom," Jade perked up, but then she saw a shadow cross his face. "Sorry if." "It's okay," he said quietly. "Mom died years ago, but she would have been proud of you." He winked, trying not to be sad. They clinked their glasses. Jade looked at him with a warm smile, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. You know, Andrew, no one has been as kind to me as you have for a long time. I feel very calm and happy with you. She bowed her head slightly, as if listening to her own words. I feel good with you too, he said softly, feeling the weight of loneliness he had carried for years dissolve. You are the best thing that has happened to me in many years. There was no exaggeration in these words. He suddenly realized that this was exactly what he thought. Jade's eyes glistened as if with tears. Oh, you make me blush. She looked away, biting her lip, but when she looked back at him, there was genuine tenderness in her gaze. After my fiancé died, I thought I wouldn't be able to feel like this again. Andrew squeezed her hand. Sorry, I didn't mean to stir up any pain. You mentioned that he died in an accident. That's terrible. I'm glad you were able to open up to new feelings. For us. Jade smiled sadly and nodded, as if choosing her words. He would want me to go on living. And I do. She looked Andrew straight in the eye. And you know, I'm starting to believe that I can truly love again. Not because someone said it was right, but because it. She placed her hand on her chest, where her heart was beating, feels real. Andrew's heart filled with warmth. He gently ran his finger along her palm, feeling with every cell how important it was that she opened up to him now. You have no idea how happy I am to hear this. After dinner, they sat on the couch for a long time with cups of green tea, listening to vinyl Jade had put on their favorite record, where soft vocals intertwined with guitar strumming and talking about the future, about travel, about the ceramics course she wanted to take, about a possible trip to Portland that he had long been postponing. A small kitten, it turned out, that Jade had recently adopted, it jumped into their laps, demanding attention. That evening, they were together for the first time. Andrew woke at dawn in her bedroom. The room was filled with her scent and the scent of the orange oil she had dropped on her pillow the night before. Jade was sleeping peacefully on his shoulder, her breath tickling his collarbone. Andrew carefully slipped out from under her arm so as not to disturb her sleep, and, standing by the window, for a few minutes simply watched the first rays of sunlight glide over her hair, painting it golden. It seemed a miracle to him that this wonderful woman was near. He quietly went into the kitchen to make coffee. The kitchen was pleasantly disorganized. Lighthouse postcards hung on the refrigerator, speckled cups stood on the marble countertop, and apples and avocados sat in a basket nearby. His gaze fell on the slightly open drawer of the sideboard. There was a folder with papers visible there. Andrew had no intention of peeking, but he glanced involuntarily. The edge of the folder was sticking out, revealing part of the inscription, documents. He remembered how Jade had said the day before that she was filling out some paperwork for a new job. Curiosity pricked him. What kind of documents? Letters of recommendation. But at the same time, he felt ashamed of his thoughts. Not wanting to pry into someone else's business, Andrew closed the drawer and continued making coffee. He chose her favorite mug with a picture of a starship and smiled silently. It was funny how quickly he learned her habits. A minute later, a sleepy Jade appeared in the kitchen doorway in a blue robe, her hair disheveled, but she had never been more beautiful to him. "Aren't you asleep yet?" she asked, smiling and rubbing her eyes. "What's that smell?" "I made us some coffee," Andrew replied, handing her the steaming mug. "Good morning." "Good morning." She reached out gratefully for the mug and suddenly kissed him on the lips, lightly touching his cheek with her free hand. "How nice it is when someone is busy in the kitchen while you sleep. I like waking up next to you." These words sounded like music to Andrew. He felt a surge of happiness and, without thinking, answered, "I could do this every morning." Jade narrowed her eyes slyly, playing with her eyebrows. "Is that a proposal?" Her voice was a mixture of humor and genuine interest. Andrew felt embarrassed, feeling the blood rush to his cheeks. Even in the half-asleep light, he noticed how he was blushing, and he felt amused at his own frankness. I meant, there's nothing stopping us from spending more time together," he muttered, looking away, then looking up again. "But if ever," he trailed off, realizing he was speaking too quickly. She, laughing, pressed herself against him, hugging him around the waist. "I was just kidding. But actually, I also like the idea that it could be like this forever. Her voice became soft. Sometimes we meet people with whom we want to be not just once, but every day, and everything suddenly becomes so simple. Andrew hugged her, feeling his heart beat fast. It seemed to him that he could hear their hearts beating in unison. For the first time in such a short time of their relationship, he thought that perhaps next to him was the woman with whom he was ready to spend the rest of his life. And this moment, so quiet and ordinary morning, coffee steam, her hair on his chest turned out to be stronger for him than any loud confessions. A few days later, Andrew decided to introduce Jade to his closest friend. The idea had been in his head for a long time. Mark had known him for almost 10 years, had lived through his student adventures, a difficult divorce, and his first big projects at work. If anyone could give an objective assessment, it was him, Andrew thought. He invited her to dine with Mark and his wife, Carol. They chose a cozy restaurant with a large aquarium and subdued lighting, where wooden boards with antipasti and fragrant baskets of bread were served on the tables. At the entrance, the waiter led them to a table by the window. Mark looked at Andrew's charming girlfriend with curiosity, not hiding his skeptical interest. He was always straightforward, but tried to look friendly for a friend. "Pleased to meet you, Jade," he extended his hand. "Andrew and I have weathered many storms together." "Likewise," she smiled, shaking his hand. "Andrew talked a lot about you and Carol. You were the ones who talked him into trying sushi for the first time, right?" "Guilty," Carol laughed. "Then Andrew spent a week going around saying raw fish was a crime." Everyone laughed, and the tension eased a little. The waiter brought the menu, and they spent some time discussing pasta, steaks, and stews. "You're not from around here, are you?" Carol asked before placing her order. "I grew up in the north," Jade answered without going into detail. "Then I moved for school, then I stayed. I fell in love with the big cities too much." "Big cities are addictive," Mark said. "What do you do?" Andrew said something to do with ecology. "Yes, I'm currently helping a company transition to sustainable practices. We work with farms, optimize water consumption, reduce emissions," she said confidently, and her voice was a mixture of professional passion and respectful distance. "It's boring to tell stories over dinner," she added, smiling. The conversation gradually turned to personal matters. Carol was talking animatedly about her hobby of making pottery, and Jade picked up the topic, recalling how she had once tried to make cups on a potter's wheel. She was an attentive listener, asking questions and interjecting jokes at the right moment. Andrew couldn't help but be proud. Jade easily joined the company, joked, laughed. It seemed that Mark, too, remained under her charm. A couple of times he caught himself smiling at her stories, although he consciously intended to be wary. Over dessert, Mark decided to probe Jade's biography a little deeper. "You told me you had a mom in Maine, right?" he said, pretending to carefully cut a cheesecake. "Do you have a close relationship?" Jade's gaze lingered on his face for a second, as if measuring the depth of the question, then shrugged. "We don't see each other that often, but we call each other. She lives in a small town, so we have completely different rhythms of life. But she's always there if needed." "And your father?" Carol asked innocently. "My father left us when I was 9. I don't remember him very well." Her voice sounded calm, as if this was an old, already accepted trauma. "Perhaps that's why it's hard for me to stay in one place for long." Andrew saw Mark and Carol exchange a look, the usual reaction of people who don't know how to make conversation after a personal revelation. He put his hand on Jade's knee under the table, a sign that he was there. She smiled. When dinner was over, the air was cool and crisp in the parking lot, surrounded by dark cars. The two women walked back to Carol's car, discussing a sauce recipe they had enjoyed that night. Mark touched Andrew's elbow. "Listen, she's just wonderful. I'm happy for you," he said quietly, looking at his friend as if he wanted to say much more. Then, after a pause, he added, "Although she hardly talked about herself, only about her work and how you met. You don't know her very well, Andrew." "Well, we can't just post everything about the past in the first month." Andrew smiled, not wanting to hear criticism. Inside, he cringed a little, but tried to be frivolous. The main thing is that we're looking to the future. Mark nodded, but Andrew saw a shadow of doubt on his friend's face. He leaned slightly closer and said, "Take care of her. And yourself, too," Mark said as they said goodbye. "I just don't want you to get burned again." On the way home, Andrew mechanically fiddled with the steering wheel, remembering Mark's words. A mixture of joy and mild irritation hummed inside him. Why couldn't his friend just be happy? He glanced at Jade, who was sitting next to him. She was looking out the window, her lips pursed into a slight smile. The light from the street lamps slid across her face, painting golden shadows. He thought, "It doesn't matter what other people think. I know how I feel." That evening, Andrew shared his feelings with Jade. This decision was not born suddenly. In the morning, he had caught himself thinking that the words, "I love you," were on the tip of his tongue, but doubts whispered, "It's too early, they won't understand you." He was afraid of scaring away the fragile balance, afraid of being vulnerable again. However, at dinner, watching her laugh with his friends, as Carol retells the joke about potters and programmers, he realized that he could no longer keep it to himself. When they arrived at his place, he confessed nervously. The lights were dim, their boots squeaked softly on the floor. He put the keys on the shelf and suddenly, turning to face her, stopped. "Jade," he said, trying to look her in the eye, though his voice shook slightly. I'm not good at making pretty speeches," he laughed nervously, "but what I'm about to say is very important to me. He held his breath for a second, as if jumping off a cliff. "I love you." Everything collapsed in his chest, and there was silence. He felt as if he had given her the key to the most vulnerable place in his soul. Jade responded in kind, almost whispering that she loved him. The words sounded sincere and touched Andrew deeply. He felt the invisible spring inside him finally relax. They stood there, holding each other's hands, and in that moment the whole world shrank to a small circle in which there were only the two of them. Andrew had never been so happy. He barely noticed how they kissed, how her fingers found his hair. Later, lying next to her under a blanket on the couch, watching a movie they almost never watched, he thought about how, for the first time in a long time, he said those words and didn't feel pain. He didn't know that in his beloved's head at that moment, a completely different calculation was taking place. Later that night, when Andrew was fast asleep, Jade walked out onto the balcony of his apartment, holding the phone to her ear. She stood barefoot on the cold tiles, leaning against the railing. The cold air made her breath foggy. "Mom, everything is going great," she said quietly into the phone, trying not to wake Andrew outside the bedroom door. "Yes, he's practically at our feet already, totally in love." A satisfied voice came from the other end, a little muffled, as if the woman was speaking from a room where the sound was reflected off the walls. "Did you find out what's going on with his finances?" "Yeah, he's got a lot of savings and a house in a nice neighborhood," Jade said casually, quietly. "He works for a big company, makes a pretty good salary. Most of his assets are in a pension fund and investments. He doesn't have any close relatives, only a cousin in another state. They don't talk. He said he had an old house that his grandfather had that he sold when he moved." She listed everything, as if she were writing a report. "He has insurance, and his house is almost paid off." "Very well," said the mother. "Don't forget about the will. You'll need to gently nudge him into signing everything over to you after the wedding. You said he was sentimental. Use that. Explain that you want to be sure in the future that this is just a piece of paper." Jade bit her lip. Somewhere beyond the door, the love she had sworn to a few hours ago was sleeping. It was cold on the balcony, but the cold inside her chest was stronger. "Mom, I'm not sure he's ready to talk about marriage yet. It's only been a month." She ran her finger along the railing, as if testing the strength of her own words. The mother's voice became stern, almost metallic. "Don't drag it out, my dear. Remember, time is money. Men who think too long start asking questions. We already had an example. Remember Thomas? You gave him 6 months, and how did it end? Bank account blocked, police almost jailed. We barely escaped then. We can't afford to make such a mistake again. The memory flashed before her eyes. Nameless police officers, glass shattering, screaming. Her palms were sweaty. She was 22. She had thought it was a game then. But that game had ended in panic and bags packed into the night. Jade frowned, clutching her phone tighter. "I remember," she said quietly, nodding into the darkness. "But Andrew is not like that. He is trusting, kind. It's completely different, Mom. Just give me a little more time. Everything will be, I promise." There was a sigh on the other end of the line, like the sound of wind in a telephone receiver. "Okay, I'm counting on you. You know how much is at stake." Her mother's voice softened, but there was still a steely note in it. "You have to think about more than just your feelings. Think about your family. Think about your plans. You're a smart girl. The main thing is not to fall in love." "I know, Mom. Everything will be fine, don't worry," Jade answered quietly, trying to keep her voice level. She felt that these words no longer sounded as confident as before. She hung up and stood for a few seconds, looking up at the dark sky. The city hummed quietly below. Images flashed through her mind. Andrew's face as he said, "I love you," his hands warm, Mark's smile sounding the alarm, the sheets of paper in her cupboard, her mother's voice whispering that time was money. There was no longer any trace of the tenderness with which she had looked at Andrew. Her lips were pressed into a hard line. She balled her hands into fists and tried to push away all hesitation. "It's all an act," she reminded herself. "He thinks he's found love, and you're just finishing it." Still, there was a tingling in her chest. Then, sighing and putting her gentle mask back on, Jade returned to the bedroom. She slipped quietly under the covers, snuggling into the warm side of an unsuspecting Andrew. In his sleep, he turned toward her, as if sensing her cold shoulder, and without waking, he hugged her. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes and feel the embrace as real, not part of a plan. Then she opened her eyes in the darkness and settled back into character. Andrew did not delay his proposal. 2 months after they met, he firmly decided. He did not want to hesitate any longer and risk losing Jade. And this decision was not an impulse, but the result of sleepless nights, reflection, and correspondence with his sister, the only person whose advice he respected, but with whom he hardly communicated. She wrote to him, "If you feel it, do it. We lose people not because we rush, but because we miss the moment." These words became the final push. He had been planning the proposal for a week. He would visit the jeweler on his lunch break, spend hours looking at rings. The consultant, an older woman with kind eyes, patiently showed off sapphires and diamonds, asking questions about Jade, what color she liked, what size her fingers were. Andrew chose a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond in a thin setting. It seemed important to him that it should not be pretentious, but reflect her sophistication. He took the box, feeling his hands shaking slightly as he signed the check. Then he went to a beach he had heard about from a fellow fisherman, a sandy spit hidden behind a pine grove, almost deserted, with a view of the bay. He thought, if I'm going to do this, it should be against the backdrop of the sunset. Under the pretext of going to an expensive restaurant, Andrew invited Jade on a date. In fact, he had taken a basket, a blanket, a bottle of chilled champagne, and a plate of fruit to the beach in advance, hid everything behind a rock, and, with bated breath, rehearsed the words, "You changed my life. You." That evening, as they drove along the coast road, Jade chatted about a funny story from the office. She looked carefree, but there was a wary look in the corner of her eye. She was trying to guess his plan. He had been quiet for a while lately, withdrawing into himself. She had asked him a few days ago, "Are you okay?" And he had brushed it off. Just a lot of work. She sensed that something important was happening. That morning, while Andrew was in the shower, she glanced into his backpack empty. The tension had eased. Could it really be today? It will be quick, she had thought then. The main thing is not to miss the moment. Using the excuse of another way to the restaurant, Andrew turned onto a sandy path to the shore. The sun was just setting, painting the sky in golden pink hues, and the water reflected the glow. A light, warm wind blew from the sea, smelling of salt and wet sand. The waves rolled gently toward the shore. Jade took off her sandals and stepped barefoot onto the warm sand. "It's so beautiful," she said quietly, looking at the sunset. There was not only a note of admiration in her voice, but also a slight sign of understanding. Whatever Andrew had planned, he had chosen the perfect place. "I have an idea," Andrew smiled and pointed to a blanket spread out nearby. "Let's stay here for a while and admire the view." She was surprised, but followed him. He laid out a blanket, took chilled champagne, 2 glasses, and fruit from a previously hidden basket. Jade laughed admiringly, shaking her head reproachfully. "What a sly one. I thought we were just going to have dinner, and you." "I want this evening to be memorable," Andrew interrupted, trying to hide his excitement. He felt his palms growing damp. His gaze kept sliding to the inside pocket of his jacket, where he kept a small box. They drank some champagne, talking in low voices. Jade told him how she had been afraid of the ocean as a child and thought that a giant octopus lived under every wave. Andrew laughed and admitted that he hadn't learned to swim until he was 15. The conversation flowed lazily, but inside him a train was rumbling. The stars were beginning to light up over the water, the first ones barely visible, but he could see them. Andrew's heart was ready to jump out of his chest. He decided. "Jade," he dropped to one knee on the blanket. The sand crunched slightly under him, and the cold fabric of the blanket's knee touched his trousers. To Jade's surprise, she immediately understood what was happening, and her breath caught. He took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. A ring with an elegant diamond sparkled inside. "You have changed my whole life. I never dreamed that I could be so happy. You are an amazing woman. You are the laughter that sounds even in my darkest moments. I want to share every morning and every sunset with you. Marry me." He spoke the words, feeling his voice vibrate. He looked up at her, and as she covered her mouth with her hand and her eyes widened, he thought, "If she says no, I don't know what I'll do." There were tears in her eyes, real or feigned this time. Andrew couldn't tell. His heart froze. "Andrew," she whispered, her voice shaking. She looked away for a second, as if distracted by something, and then met his eyes again. "Yes, yes, of course." He sighed as if he had just emerged from the depths and put the ring on her finger, which was shaking slightly. Jade threw herself on his neck, hugging him as if she wanted to protect him from all harm. They both cried with joy. On the deserted beach, under the sound of the surf, they kissed, laughed, and hugged. Andrew was sure this was the best day of his life. He saw the ring sparkle on her hand and mentally imagined how it would shine in the wedding photos. That night, when they got home, he fell asleep happy, picturing his next steps in his head. Tell his friends, file a report, call his relatives. Jade, lying next to him and listening to his even breathing, sent her mother a message. He proposed. I said yes. A minute later, the screen flashed. Great. Don't forget our deadlines. We'll discuss it tomorrow. She put the phone under her pillow, closed her eyes, and once again forced herself to believe that everything was under control. The news of the upcoming wedding stunned his entourage. In the morning, before the office, he called Mark. He even choked on his coffee when he heard that his friend had decided to get married so soon. "Are you sure? 2 months is very fast," he said carefully as he and Andrew discussed plans over lunch in the cafeteria. Mark's spoon of tomato soup froze in his hand. "I know it's fast," Andrew said, defensively and strangely proud at the same time. "But I feel like it's right. I love her, Mark. I've never been so sure." "You know, I'll always support you," Mark sighed. "I'm just worried. You're a gentle, trusting person." He fell silent, not wanting to ruin the happy moment with gloomy forebodings, and smiled. "Okay, it's not for me to talk you out of it." He clapped Andrew on the shoulder. "Then let's get ready for the wedding. How can I help? I can arrange a stripper." He winked, and Andrew laughed, shaking his head. "Actually, it's going to be modest," he said. "We decided not to have a big celebration, just a signing at the mayor's office and a dinner for our own people." "Really?" Mark raised his eyebrows. "And Jade's family isn't offended?" She has almost no relatives, only her mother, Andrew explained. And I have only a few relatives, except for you and Carol, as my closest friends. Will Mom come? Mark asked. Yes, I'll meet her soon. Jade said that her mother had already nodded approvingly at our plans. Then came the little chores that seemed to take up all their free time. They went to the town hall together to apply. Behind them in line were a couple of pensioners. Ahead of them were young guys in ripped jeans. Jade wrote down the date, May 18th. Andrew felt like his signature on the document made this step real. They went to a jeweler to choose engagement rings. Jade insisted on keeping the engagement ring he had proposed with as his wedding ring, saying it was perfect. She barely even let him look at the others, shaking her head. No, I want this one. They went to buy a suit and a dress. Jade chose an elegant white dress, simple, without bulky frills, emphasizing her figure. She left the fitting room, and Andrew's eyes lit up. He came up to her and quietly whispered, "You are the most beautiful woman in the world." She smiled at him in the mirror, measuring how comfortable the dress was. He bought a light suit and a blue tie Carol chose, referring to fashion and the color of his eyes. Mark and Carol happily agreed to be witnesses. I'll even buy a new suit, Mark said, feigning drama. His colleagues at work presented Andrew with a toaster in a box with a bow and signed the card. Finally. Meanwhile, Jade was not forgetting about something else. At night, she continued to call her mother, discussing in detail what document she should subtly slip Andrew to sign a power of attorney or a will. Vivian demanded, "Make sure he registers the house in both of your names. It's normal to worry about the future. A man wants his wife to be protected." Jade promised, although part of her resisted, like a once stubborn colt. A couple of weeks after the engagement, only 5 people showed up at City Hall for the wedding ceremony. The bride and groom, best man Mark and his wife, and Jade's mother, Vivian. It was a sunny day, but there had been a light rain in the morning, and the asphalt was glistening. Andrew drove to City Hall, his fingers sliding over the steering wheel. He had rehearsed, "I do," even though he knew he wouldn't forget. There was a feeling of pre-wedding anticipation in his heart and a lump in his throat. It had suddenly become serious. Andrew first saw Vivian a few minutes before the ceremony, in the lobby of the City Hall. A slender woman of about 60, well-groomed, in an elegant cream suit, with an impeccable hairdo. The clear features of her face betrayed a cold character, but her smile was almost family. Her hair was perfectly styled, on her ears were gold earrings in the form of small rings. Vivian warmly embraced Andrew, although they met for the first time. The scent of her perfume was thick, floral. "I'm so glad to finally meet you, Andrew," she said, her tone warm, almost purring. "My daughter has told me so much about you. Thank you for making her happy." Andrew smiled sheepishly. He felt like a little boy being complimented. "It's a pleasure too, Mrs. Vivian," he said, trying to remember whether they were addressed as you or thou. "I'm happy that Jade has agreed to be my wife. You've raised a wonderful woman." Vivian looked at him, her smile momentarily searching, as if she were scanning his information. He felt a slight shudder, as if he were being tested. But then she put her arm around Jade's shoulders and said, "How beautiful." She adjusted the hem of her daughter's dress. "You are a wonderful couple," she continued. "I hope you will take care of each other." Her tone was gentle, but there was a glimmer of firmness in her eyes. "Of course," Andrew nodded. He caught Mark's eye, and Mark winked at him as if to say, "Hang in there." The call to the ceremony sounded, and everyone filed into the hall. The hall was small and bright, with vases of white lilies on the registrar's table. The registrar in glasses kindly seated the newlyweds. Everything happened almost instantly. A few formalities, reading the obligatory words about rights and obligations, signing, exchanging rings. When he signed the certificate, his hand trembled for a second, but Jade secretly squeezed his fingers as if conveying confidence. The next moment, Jade and Andrew were already husband and wife. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss each other," the receptionist said, and Mark clapped theatrically, winking at Carol. Carol wiped the corners of her eyes with a napkin. As they kissed, to the applause of the 5 people present, Andrew felt his heart leap with happiness. He couldn't take his eyes off her face. Jade seemed like the closest thing to him at that moment. Vivian stood next to him, her manner casual, but her gaze lingered on their hands, clasped together. For a moment, her eyes narrowed, as if mentally checking a box. After the official part, everyone headed to a small restaurant to celebrate the event. The restaurant was covered with green plants and lamps under lampshades. Light jazz was playing. They ordered oysters, salads, and champagne. At the table, Mark raised a toast to the newlyweds. "I've known Andrew for years," he began, standing up. "He's one of the kindest souls I've ever met, and I'm glad I've finally found someone I'm ready to walk through life with. Jade," he turned to her, "you're a magical cook, and that's enough to keep him around. But most importantly, you make him happy. For your love, for your patience, for the many years together." Carol smiled tenderly, raising her glass. Vivian was relaxed, but her questions were still directed at her son. She asked Andrew about his job, his position, and his prospects for growth. "Working for a big company is great," she said casually, carefully cutting up a fish fillet. "These are the times when stability is worth its weight in gold. How long have you been there?" "Almost 10 years now," Andrew replied, feeling a little interviewed but trying not to show it. "I started as a junior programmer. Now I'm running a small department. I'm planning on applying for a promotion, though." "Very well," Vivian nodded. "I understand you own the house?" The question sounded casual, but Mark tensed up. He caught Carol's gaze, and she closed her eyes slightly. "Yeah," Andrew confirmed, choking on a sip of water in surprise. "I paid off the mortgage a couple of years ago. It's a small house, but we're comfortable." "Home is great. It means Jade won't have to live in rented apartments anymore," she concluded. Her voice was smooth as silk, but there was a note of satisfaction in it. Jade smiled silently, running her finger along the stem of her glass. She noticed Mark's tension, but not a muscle moved on her face. "I'm glad I can provide us with a comfortable place to live," Andrew said. He felt a little awkward under Vivian's intense, attentive gaze, but she immediately smiled amiably, clinking her glass of champagne with him. "To your happy family life." After dinner, the newlyweds moved into Andrew's house. The van he had hired brought a few boxes, although in reality Jade had very few things: a couple of suitcases of clothes, a few boxes of books, and that same folder of documents. Even before the wedding, Jade had gradually moved her things to him, and now they had finally settled in together. Andrew carried the boxes in. Chuckling, Jade, laughing, gave the instructions. "This one goes in the bedroom, this one goes in the office." She quickly found a place for her jewelry and her favorite blanket on the sofa, and hung a couple of her paintings. The house came alive with new shades. "It feels like our home now," Andrew said, taking her hand. That evening, as usual, he carried her over the threshold of the bedroom in his arms, laughing and almost tripping over the threshold, and for a long time they could not calm down their laughter. Every morning, waking up next to his beloved wife seemed like a fairy tale to him. He made coffee, she sang in the shower. They bought dishes together, discussed what color to paint the wall in the living room. Sometimes, Jade, hugging him, said, "I'm so glad that now we have a real we." Sometimes she sat in the evening with a laptop, and when he approached, she quickly closed the tab with a report, saying, "It's work-related." She continued to call her mother, going out onto the balcony when she thought he would not hear. Andrew was busy with happiness and did not notice how dry terms sounded in phone conversations. Share, re-signing, power of attorney. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but beneath the surface, as in deep water, currents were already swirling. Vivian stayed in town for a couple more days after the wedding. She seemed determined to take advantage of the opportunity to become as close as possible to her new son-in-law. She would bring them homemade apple pie, offer to help them hang curtains, or call Jade in the middle of the day to invite her for a walk downtown. Andrew, although he felt a little tense from her constant presence, tried to be polite and grateful. After all, she was his wife's mother. "Vivian, come in. We're still a bit of a mess," he said, opening the door when she arrived unexpectedly with a bouquet of lilies and a box of cookies. He was wearing a sweater, holding a mug of coffee. Bills and a shopping list for renovations were scattered on the kitchen table. "Andrew, darling, I just couldn't leave without spending a couple more evenings with you," Vivian said, entering and looking around the house with some kind of calculation. "I brought lilies for comfort, and the cookies I baked them myself." "Thank you very much," he responded, happily taking the bouquet. "You cook so deliciously that I'm starting to worry about gaining weight." "You know what they say, happiness makes you fat," she chuckled. "Well, Jade will keep an eye on your shape." Soon, the three of them were sitting around the kitchen table, sun pouring in through the large window, drinking tea. Jade was cutting up strawberries to put in a bowl of yogurt. The conversation was light, discussing what curtains would be best for the living room, what plants to plant in the garden. "I'd plant roses," Jade said dreamily, running her finger along the rim of her teacup. "Remember those tea roses by Grandma's gazebo, Mom? They smelled so wonderful." "Of course," Vivian smiled. "But roses require care. They're not succulents. If you want, I can give you some cuttings." "We'd love to," Andrew said, glad that the conversation was about something harmless. He did imagine a bed of roses and Jade pruning the faded flowers. It gave his future a cozy, domestic image. However, the topic soon changed. Vivian, picking up a cup of tea and slightly twirling the spoon, as if choosing her words, suddenly started talking about serious things. "Have you thought about making a will, Andrew?" she asked suddenly, casually, stirring her tea. "I know it's an unpleasant topic, but life is unpredictable, and now that you're a family, it's worth taking care of the future. For example, to make sure the house goes to your wife, so there are no legal complications if—" She left the sentence hanging in the air. Andrew was a little taken aback. He hadn't expected this turn of the conversation. In his mind, a will was associated with serious illness or old age, something distant. He was 39, and he rarely thought about death. To be honest, no," he admitted, setting his cup down on the table. "I'm 39, so it's probably too early to be thinking about a will. All I have is a house and some savings." He felt that superstitious feeling many people have when talking about death returned to him, that mentioning it might attract it. Jade, sitting next to him, gently placed her hand on his. He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw support, or what he thought was support. "Darling, Mom just wants us to have everything set up properly. In case something happens, of course, nothing like that will happen," she squeezed his fingers lightly, "but just in case, so that we are protected and trust each other with everything." She said it so softly that it sounded like concern, but Vivian nodded with satisfaction, as if she had heard what she wanted. "It's a simple legal measure," Vivian continued, helping herself to a cookie. "Believe me, I've seen terrible situations. A husband dies without a will, and his inheritance drags on for years in court. Relatives appear out of nowhere, all demanding something. And you, Andrew, said that you only have a cousin. What if he shows up and wants a share?" She looked at him, tilting her head slightly. "Well, I don't really know him," Andrew said, genuinely surprised at how quickly the conversation had gotten this far. "We haven't spoken in about 10 years. I don't think he'll care about my house." "Still," Vivian insisted, "it's better to be on the safe side. Besides, don't you want to show Jade that you trust her completely? A will isn't about death, it's about love, about wanting her to be protected." She used the words trust and protection deliberately, knowing how powerfully they affected people. "You're probably right," he said, looking at Jade and her mother. "We'll have to look into that. I'll talk to my lawyer in a few days." He tried to push aside the uneasy feeling and just see it as a practical measure. Vivian nodded approvingly. "That's a great idea. And speaking of paperwork, Andrew, you might want to update the beneficiaries on your insurance policies and your accounts. People usually add each other after they get married, right? It's a simple procedure." She spoke as if she were reading a checklist. "And make sure you both have access to your bank accounts. My husband and I neglected to do that a while back, and it caused me so much trouble. Yeah, I guess, he agreed, though his head was spinning a little from the abundance of information. I hadn't thought about it. My insurance was taken out with the last company, and I think my father was listed as the beneficiary there. He tried to remember the last time he'd opened these documents. I can help you with the list of what needs to be changed, Jade offered solicitously. I even have an article saved somewhere on this topic. It's all written down there, what to fill out in what order, what certificates are needed. Thank you, dear, Andrew smiled, touched by her attention. We'll figure it out together. I don't want to run around to notaries alone later. He decided that he might even contact Mark's family lawyer to find out the details. Vivian sipped her tea, looking from her son-in-law to her daughter. Her eyes narrowed, and she spoke in a calm tone, but Andrew again caught the hint of demand. It's just paperwork, Andrew, she said, ending the topic. And it's good that you listen to my advice. We women sometimes think about things that men don't want to think about. But there's nothing wrong with that. I'm so glad my daughter has such a caring husband. After Vivian left, Andrew felt a strange uneasiness for a while. She was like an experienced lawyer, voicing things he hadn't thought about before. Legal guarantees, possible claims, heirs. The conversation about the will made him think about things he hadn't thought about before. In one half of his mind, superstition and fear of death were fighting, in the other, rationality was dictating. Yes, this makes sense. The next day, he called Mark. Listen, Andrew began with a smile in his voice. This is going to be funny, but I think I'm getting old. My mother-in-law asked me if I made a will. On the other end of the line, Mark burst out laughing. Andrew, you married a woman who takes everything practically. Your money is now our common property, he teased his friend. Then he added seriously, jokes aside, this is really a necessity. Just make sure everything is legally clean and don't sweat it. And please, before you sign anything, show it to a lawyer. There was concern and a slight shadow of suspicion in his voice. Of course, Andrew nodded, although Mark couldn't see him. It's just funny that I hadn't thought of it, but they both did. Women, Mark chuckled. That evening, Andrew opened the cabinet and pulled out a stack of papers, old insurance policies, house deeds, pension statements. He laid them out on the table, and Jade sat down next to him with interest, immediately reaching for the folder. Look, she said, this is life insurance. It says your father is the beneficiary, but he's gone. You need to change the name here. She spoke evenly, like a consultant. And here is the mortgage agreement. It's closed. That's good news. She sorted through them carefully, pretending to help, but in her head she was making quick notes, house deeds, signatures, seals. When Vivian left and the house was filled with its usual silence, Andrew tried to push away his heavy thoughts. He looked out the window. The garden was filled with golden light. Jade came into the room with a stack of their wedding photos that had been brought from the photographer the day before. She looked at them, laughing at the funny moments. How Mark held the ring incorrectly, how Vivian froze with a glass in the background. Look, she said, holding up a photograph of the two of them leaving City Hall. How happy we look. Because we are happy, he said, holding her close. And we will be. He put all his optimism into these words. Now he had a family to look after, and if the paperwork was part of that, well, he would do it. Andrew walked over to his wife, hugged her from behind, and she leaned her head on his shoulder, smiling. For a second, he thought back to the conversation in the kitchen, and an unpleasant chill ran down his spine. But the warm scent of her hair, a mix of lavender and almond, washed away his worries. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? She asked in surprise, turning her head. For coming into my life. Now everything is right. You gave me what was missing. Jade turned around and kissed him on the lips, lingering slightly. We have a long, happy life ahead of us, my hero, she said, almost in a whisper. There was confidence in her voice and something else, like a promise. Andrew closed his eyes, savoring the moment. He didn't notice the shadow of a cold smile flicker across Jade's face in the mirror opposite, vanishing before he could look at her again. Vivian was gone, leaving behind not only boxes of cookies and bouquets, but also an inconspicuous seed that was slowly and steadily taking root in their family life, unfolding a scenario Andrew had not yet suspected. Their married life began happily. The honeymoon weeks flew by in a warm fog. They furnished the house together, watched TV series in an embrace, cooked dinner for two, and arranged souvenirs. Andrew ate breakfast every morning with a smile, watching Jade dance and pour herself coffee. He enjoyed everyday closeness, buying a new shelf for the bathroom together, arguing about where to put the photo frame with their wedding photo. But gradually, barely noticeable cracks began to appear in this idyll. A month after the wedding, Andrew noticed that Jade was becoming more demanding and sometimes overly emotional. He attributed this to the fact that their characters were getting used to each other. They were just learning each other's everyday habits. The first quarrels looked like small details: who left the toothpaste tube unopened, who forgot to take out the trash. Jade could suddenly flare up because of an uncollected plate, and then just as quickly melt away, apologizing for her stupid mood. One evening, Andrew returned from work later than usual to find Jade sitting on the sofa in the dark in tears. An empty plate of cold pasta sat on the table. The room smelled of mint from the candle she had lit. The clock showed 9 o'clock. "What happened?" he asked, rushing towards her, alarmed, throwing his briefcase on the floor. Jade sniffled, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "Nothing. I'm sorry, it's nonsense. You were just late, and I started to worry. I've been alone all day, waiting for you. Dinner got cold. I know you have work, but I'm so used to you coming at 7. Andrew felt guilty. He had indeed been sitting in the office trying to finish the project. He had been in a hurry, but his boss had kept him busy with a new client, and the time had flown by. He remembered that he had been planning to text Jade, but his phone had died. "I'm sorry, honey. I should have told you I'd be late. Don't cry, please." He hugged her, stroking her back. His heart sank. He didn't want to be the reason for her tears. Jade buried her face in his chest. He could feel her shoulders shaking. "I know work, but I missed you so much." She sobbed. "I'm probably overreacting. You're just all I have. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll lose you." There was such sincerity in her words that Andrew felt even more guilty. Andrew kissed her hair, smelling her shampoo. "I'm always with you, do you hear? No job will make me wait for you like this anymore. I promise to improve." He thought he had already lost his former workaholic and decided that personal things were more important. She quickly calmed down, wiped her tears, and smiled. They warmed up for dinner together. Right after that incident, Andrew became more disciplined. He always texted her if he was late. He even set his alarm for 6 p.m. so he wouldn't forget the time. However, a week later, a new episode arose. Mark invited Andrew to have a beer after work. They had not seen each other for a long time. Mark worked a lot and was busy with the children, and Andrew was missing from home. It was obvious that the friends needed to reconnect. "Darling," he said over breakfast, pouring coffee into mugs, "Mark asked me to come for a drink after work today. I was thinking of meeting him. We haven't seen each other for a couple of weeks. Would you mind?" He expected Jade to say, "Sure, go ahead," because she had said before that friendship was an important part of life. But she cut the bread and suddenly answered sharply, without looking at him. "Of course, go ahead, since it's more important to you than spending the evening with me." Her voice was even, but he caught the icy note. "I'll cook dinner for two, and you'll have fun with your friend." Andrew was taken aback. He figured he hadn't spent a single minute outside the house in the last few weeks. They were literally inseparable. "Jade, what are you saying? We're together every day. I'll just spend an hour with Mark. You yourself treat him well," he carefully noted, trying to understand her. She turned away, put down the knife, and crossed her arms. "Yes, but lately I feel like you're bored with me since you're looking for company elsewhere," she said coldly, not looking at him. "Maybe I'm not interesting enough? Or is there something you need to discuss that you can't discuss with me?" "It's not like that," Andrew sighed, approaching her. He felt the same lump in his throat as a week ago. It's just that I haven't seen Mark for a couple of weeks, and he misses me. And I miss the friendly company too. But if you're against it, of course I won't go. His voice was soft, conciliatory. Jade looked at him with wet eyes, her lower lip trembling slightly. I don't want to be a nagging wife and stop you. Go if you want, she said, but her go sounded like stay. She paused. It just seems like I'm in your way sometimes. But that's my problem, not yours. Andrew was torn between his emotions. On the one hand, he really wanted to see his friend to regain the lost ease of communication. On the other hand, he felt sorry to hurt his wife, who had so openly demonstrated her affection. He wrote Mark a short message. Sorry, can't make it today. Housework. Tomorrow, Mark replied. Okay, but are you okay? Jade had been extra affectionate all evening, as if rewarding Andrew for staying. She had cooked his favorite lasagna, bought him the bottle of wine they had been saving. They had watched a movie, and she had snuggled up to him, whispering, I'm so glad you're here. He tried not to think about the bad taste her words left behind. She's just worried, he told himself. It'll pass. We're still not used to living together. A couple of days later, Mark finally insisted on meeting. They met at a bar after work. Mark, raising his glass, asked, You haven't disappeared forever? There was a joke in his voice, but also concern. Andrew smiled. Sorry about that time. Jade was upset. She was waiting for me, and I decided to stay. Listen, I don't mind, Mark said carefully. I'm just pointing out that this is the second time you've canceled a meeting because of her mood. Are you sure everything's okay? Yeah, just getting used to it. She's anxious. She's afraid of losing me. Andrew tried not to defend himself too much. Love is great, but everyone has to have their own boundaries, Mark said. You know, I've been there. Okay, I don't want to lecture you. Just be careful. Andrew nodded, although deep down he felt a little uneasy. But he convinced himself it was best not to make a big deal out of it. Over time, Jade took on the role of managing their budget. It started when she brought her laptop into the kitchen one evening and opened up a spreadsheet. Look, she said, showing the rows and columns. I've made a list of our monthly expenses. The mortgage is closed, but there are still utilities, food, gas, internet, phones. And income, your salary, mine is small but stable. She laid out the receipts. If we put aside 20% a month, in a year we can go to Europe, and also save up for a new car. Andrew was never a spendthrift, but he didn't strictly plan his spending either. He earned well and allowed himself spontaneous gifts. Jade, on the other hand, made a whole table of expenses and income, convincing her husband that this way they would save up faster for common goals, for example, for future trips or a car upgrade. She soon began using financial applications, asking him to provide a login and password so that she could see all the accounts in one place. Do you mind if I keep an eye on the bills? She asked one morning, sorting through utility bills. Bank statements lay on the table, and she concentrated on underlining the amounts. You have so much work to do, and I can do this. See, I've already found a couple of subscriptions that we don't use, but the money is still being written off. Like your old movie subscription, we watch a different one, and you pay for a gym membership, and you've never been there. Do we need that? Of course, dear, Andrew agreed easily, genuinely relieved that someone was organizing what he had always considered a boring routine. I'm even glad that you're taking on these chores. I don't understand this at all. Then sign this form, she held out the paper. It's just permission to add me to your bank account as a co-owner. It makes it easier to pay the bills. She said it almost lazily, as if it were a formality. He signed it without thinking, without even reading it properly. Jade smiled and put the document in the folder. This gave her access to all his accounts and cards. Andrew trusted his wife completely and saw no point in monitoring every expense. If Jade said that they needed to cut back on entertainment a little to save up, he believed her calculations. She gently but persistently convinced him that they needed to cancel their membership in the gym. We can run together in the park, why waste money? cut back on meals out. Why spend money on a cafe when I cook better? And abandon the idea of a new attachment. Let's save up for a food processor. It's healthier. Over time, he noticed that he was hardly seeing his bank notices. All the statement emails were forwarded to a shared address that she controlled. Sometimes he would ask, "How much is in our account?" And she would reply, "It's enough, don't worry." So Jade slowly but surely wrapped him with her attention and care like a grapevine wraps around a tree. She didn't forbid him to be friends, but every time he took a step away, she met it with pain and tears. She didn't ask him for money, but she controlled what it was spent on. And he, in love and naive, accepted it as a manifestation of love. In the rare moments when he was alone, like when Jade went out to call his mother, and he sat on the veranda with a cup of tea, watching the sun go down, a quiet question would creep into his mind. Is this too much control? But then he would remember her crying when he was late, or the way she made him pasta, and he would push the thought away. She's just caring, he told himself. Someone finally really cares about me. From the other end of the house, her voice would be soft. Yes, Mom, everything is going according to plan. He trusts me completely. Now it's just a matter of time. One day, while going through his mail, Andrew found a letter from his bank about a large transfer of funds. He was unpacking bill after bill when an envelope with his bank's logo caught his eye. Transfer notification, it said. He frowned as he read the figure, $50,000. Under purpose, it said, interbank transfer. He was surprised he hadn't made any translation. Thinking, he went to the window where Jade was working in the garden, turning over the earth in a bed. Jade, catching a glimpse of the envelope, immediately explained, putting aside the hoe and wiping the earth from her hands on her trousers. Oh, that! She got up from the lawn and walked into the kitchen, trying to keep her voice light. Remember I told you Mom was refinancing the house. She suddenly had trouble making a payment. The bank only gave her a couple of days. She asked me to lend her some money for a couple of weeks to cover the payment. I transferred 50 grand from our account, then she'll pay it back. Sorry, I didn't have time to ask you, it was urgent, and you were in a meeting. She touched his shoulder, but Andrew saw her watching his reaction carefully. Andrew blinked, realizing the amount of money involved. It was a lot, even by his account. He folded the letter slowly. A thought flashed through his mind. 50,000? That simple? 50,000. He choked on air. Well, if Mom needs it, of course, no problem. Just call next time, okay? He spoke more calmly than he felt, trying not to show his confusion. Something inside him clicked. For the first time, he felt like he had been passed over when it came to their shared money. Of course, darling, Jade kissed him on the cheek, as if rewarding him for his compliance. I've already calculated everything. We won't need this money for now, but it will help out Mom. She thanked you very much. She said that we are a real family. She spoke confidently, without a shadow of a doubt, as if the decision was obvious. Andrew put the letter down, feeling a little uneasy that such a sum had been withdrawn without his knowledge. But it was for Jade's mother. He pushed his doubts aside. Later, he called the bank to clarify the details. The bank confirmed. The transfer had been authorized from an account to which both had rights. The operator's voice confirmed that his wife's electronic signature had been attached. Officially, everything was in order. Andrew sighed and said to himself, "This is temporary. She has an explanation for everything." He did not know that this money had gone far from refinancing, but directly to Vivian's hidden account. Time passed and life settled into its usual routine. Andrew was content with the family coziness, although he hardly saw his friends anymore, partly on his own initiative, partly because Jade always planned their leisure time together. Every weekend they went to a country park, or to another antique market, or to a cooking master class. He loved these trips, but sometimes he felt a vague longing for spontaneity. Mark invited him to meet him several times, but Andrew politely declined, sensing that his wife was uncomfortable with this. Another time, now we have plans, he wrote. Communication was limited to rare calls to work. Mark spoke briefly, realizing that there was no one left to talk about much with. "Hey, are you even alive?" Mark said jokingly on the phone one day. "Yes, just married," Andrew chuckled. "I understand. Know that I am always near," and the friend's voice died down. One day, about 3 months after their wedding, Andrew received an email from an unfamiliar address in his personal inbox. He rarely checked that old inbox, but a notification arrived. The subject line read, "Attention, concerning your wife." Thinking it was spam, he was about to delete the message when he noticed the attached photo. Curiosity got the better of him. He clicked. The photo showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Jade standing arm in arm with an older man at some kind of celebration. Both were in evening attire, with a banquet hall visible in the background. The man was holding a glass of whiskey, wearing an expensive watch and a gold ring. The woman in a dark green suit was smiling. Her face had the same curve of her lips, the same eyes, although her hair was lighter and her makeup was brighter. The text of the letter contained only a few phrases. "Andrew, your wife is not who she claims to be. She was already married to this man and deceived him. Be careful. If you want to know the details, reply to this letter." Andrew reread the message a dozen times. His heart was pounding. He felt his palms growing cold. The woman in the photo did look like Jade, but the style was different. Next to her, a gray-haired man in his 70s smiled, obviously wealthy, as indicated by the expensive watch and gold ring on his plump finger. On the table in front of them was a sign that read, "Herbert Langdon," but Andrew paid no attention to the details. Who could have sent such a lie? Andrew's hand shook on the mouse. He found the sender's name, some G. Lawrence at consultants.us, an address that didn't tell him anything. His first impulse was to show the letter to his wife. Andrew almost called out to Jade, who was busy somewhere in the backyard. He imagined her looking at the photo, crying, saying it was slander. But something held him back. He remembered how Jade had taken offense at any hint that he didn't trust her. If he were to make such an accusation now without evidence, it would break her heart, especially if the letter was a lie. Perhaps this was a dirty trick, someone trying to sow discord. He also remembered the one time Jade had mentioned her dead fiancé, and her eyes had filled with tears. How could she marry an old man right after such a loss? He thought indignantly. He decided not to tell anyone for now. He closed the email without deleting it and saved the photo in a separate folder. "Maybe this is someone's cruel joke or mistake. I need to think it over first," he told himself, trying to calm his heartbeat. He was out of sorts for the rest of the day. Around the office, he found himself returning to the image over and over again. When his boss asked him to double-check a report, he made two mistakes, which was rare. A colleague asked, "Andrew, is everything okay?" And he nodded, unsmiling. He was already starting to mentally list the possibilities. The girl in the photo was a double. Someone had deliberately changed the hair color in Photoshop. Maybe it was a still from a movie. At home, Jade noticed that her husband seemed preoccupied with something and even asked at dinner, "You're kind of quiet today. Is everything okay?" She placed her hand on his and squeezed it gently, like she used to do when she wanted him to open up. Yeah, Andrew answered quickly, trying to smile. "Just a little tired from work. This project will be over soon, and I'll be able to breathe a sigh of relief." He lied brazenly, hoping his voice wasn't shaking. He watched her across the table, her genuinely concerned look, her soft smile. No, he thought, it can't be. A woman like that wouldn't be capable of the kind of deception they write about. He reminded himself of all the times she'd been gentle, caring, her tears when he'd lingered. Was this a game? And yet, that night, when Jade had fallen asleep, Andrew got up and opened his laptop again. He stared at the unfamiliar photograph for a long time, zooming in on the woman's face. The resemblance was undeniable. He tried to examine the ring on her finger to see if she was married. He noticed the nameplate of the man's name, Herbert Langdon. He typed the name into a search engine. The first result was a news article from 2 years ago. Billionaire philanthropist Herbert Langdon dies. Family in mourning. The article had a photo. Langdon, the man in the photo, at a charity event, with a woman next to him, a different, younger woman. The text said that the billionaire passed away suddenly, leaving behind a large inheritance. The lawyer's comment, widow declines to comment. Andrew froze. A widow, a young widow. He searched for her name in various publications. Death of elderly businessman, mysterious disappearance of young wife. One article briefly mentioned, investigators were looking into offshore accounts. The widow was suspected of fraud. And there was a photograph of a young woman who looked like Jade, but she was under a different name, Lisa Hughes. Andrew felt the blood pounding in his ears. He didn't notice how cold it was in the room. Only towards morning did he fall into a restless sleep, still not having decided what to do with the mysterious warning. The next day, plagued by doubts, he called Mark. They arranged to meet for lunch. "Mark," Andrew began, nibbling on his sandwich, "I have a question. Just promise me you won't jump to conclusions." "It's scary already," Mark muttered, putting down his fork. "Spill it." "I received a strange letter with a photo. In the photo, a woman who looks very much like Jade, arm in arm with," he recounted, omitting details. "The letter says that she was already married to this old man and deceived him. What should I do? Is this some kind of slander?" Andrew looked at his friend with eyes full of disbelief and a plea for help. Mark frowned, leaning back in his chair. A shadow of worry flickered in his gaze. He asked to see a photo. Andrew hesitantly took out his phone, found the image. Mark stared for a long moment, then looked up. "It looks a lot like Jade," he said quietly. "But the hair is lighter. Maybe it's Photoshop. Or maybe she had another life you don't know about. I don't want to rub salt in the wound, but are you sure you know everything about her past?" "No," Andrew admitted, staring at the table. "I believed every word she said. I didn't want to seem distrustful. She said her fiancé was dead. I didn't ask." The love that still simmered within him warred with his growing fear. "Listen," Mark said seriously. "Maybe you should talk to her, carefully, without making accusations. Or find out about that man. Maybe it turns out to be a fake, but don't ignore it." He put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I'm here if anything happens." Andrew nodded. He knew that talking to Jade could change everything. But he wasn't ready yet. He felt the shaky foundation on which he had built his new life shaking. He could only hope that this was a mistake, a cruel joke, an unpleasant coincidence. But after reading about Langdon, his confidence melted away like snow in his palms. After his conversation with Michael, the phone buzzed in his hand for a long time. Andrew went out onto the porch, sat on the steps, and spent a few minutes simply looking out at the empty street, trying to collect his thoughts. The cold anxiety retreated, giving way to a clear determination. He knew he was playing cat and mouse now, and the stakes were his life. He couldn't sit back. The first thing he did was call Mark. His heart pounded in anticipation of the dial tone. "Andrew," Mark responded. "Is something wrong? Your voice—" "It's okay," he said quietly. "But I need your help. Promise not to tell anyone yet. We're supposed to meet tomorrow morning. I have important information about Jade." He gave a brief outline, the letter, the call, Michael's story. Mark let out a shocked breath. "Damn," Mark whispered. "I had no idea it was that serious. Of course I'll help. What are you going to do?" "Michael is flying in tomorrow. We have to meet him, collect evidence, then go to the police. But Jade suggested going to the lake for the weekend, to a house for two." Andrew's voice wavered. "I'm sure this is part of their plan. We need to think of something." "Listen," Mark said after a pause. "If she thinks you don't suspect anything, you can't show that you know. But you shouldn't go alone." Mark thought for a moment. "Maybe you should say you're sick, reschedule the trip, or make up that you have important work." "I'll try to talk her out of it. If that doesn't work, I'll need a backup plan." Andrew whispered so Jade wouldn't hear. "If I do go, keep in touch. I'll text you a code word if I sense danger. You'll have to call or come." They agreed that the code word would be the name of their favorite college bowling team, the Strikers. If Andrew sent it, Mark would call the police. The next day, in a quiet cafe that smelled of freshly roasted coffee, Andrew met Michael Watson. The man was thin, with a graying beard and deep wrinkles that betrayed the stress he had endured. He arrived with a large briefcase with folders sticking out of it. When they met, they shook hands. "Here, look," Michael said, laying out photographs and documents on the table. The pictures showed the same woman, at her wedding with Michael, on the yacht with Herbert Langdon, next to a police officer who had apparently taken her statement. "Here's a copy of our marriage license. Here's the notary document she forged, executing the power of attorney." He ran his finger over the signature, explaining how he had noticed the discrepancy. Andrew digested the information with difficulty. Horror, disgust, and a growing determination to save himself all warred within him. "We have to go to the police," he said, feeling his fists tighten. "These papers, that should be enough." "I tried, but I need a witness to confirm it's her. You're the new victim. Together, we'll have a better chance," Michael said. "I've contacted a detective who's willing to look at the case. We can set up a meeting after you gather your evidence." He paused, then added, "Do you have anything that connects her to the financial fraud?" "Not yet," Andrew admitted, "but I'll try to find her correspondence with her mother on her computer. She sends her letters often, and there are documents that she keeps in a box." He remembered the documents folder he had seen at first. "I didn't attach any importance to them, but now—" He promised to try to make copies. "Be careful," Michael said again, almost pleadingly. "She's dangerous. If you decide to open her up, do it when you're safe. And please, don't eat or drink anything from her for the next few days. Tell her the doctor has put you on a diet, that you can't drink alcohol, something like that." They agreed not to call each other, often only via secure messenger. Michael gave Andrew the contacts of a private detective and a lawyer. Walking home, Andrew felt the world was alien. He suddenly looked at the people on the streets and wondered how many of them were living double lives. His house seemed like a fortress, but an enemy lived in it. Meanwhile, Jade continued her role as the perfect wife. That evening, happily looking at her laptop screen, she told Andrew, "Everything is booked. The house is right on the lake, with a terrace, a fireplace, a jacuzzi. I asked the owners if there was a phone connection. They said it was weak, but there was Wi-Fi." She spoke as if she was planning a regular romantic weekend. Her eyes were shining. Andrew forced himself to smile. "That sounds great." He checked in his mind. If there was Wi-Fi, then he could get in touch. He tried to feel the ground carefully. "Maybe we should invite Mark and Carol. We haven't seen them in a while. That would be fun." Jade froze for a split second, then quickly laughed. "Darling, you are so sweet. But I wanted this vacation to be just for the two of us. We are almost never alone, either work or renovations, and the house is small." She looked away to the laptop and then added, "And Carol is busy now. She has a ceramics course." "Okay, whatever you say," Andrew nodded, noting that she waved her hand quickly. The next morning, he woke up early and quietly snuck into Jade's office while she was still asleep. He knew the password to her laptop, the date of their engagement. Inside were many folders: work, photos, personal. He opened personal. There were photos from their travels, scans of recipes. He thought he would find nothing, but then he saw a hidden folder marked with a strange combination of letters. His heart was pounding. He opened it. Inside were scans of documents in English and Spanish, copies of some passports with different names and photos of Jade, but under different names. There were also letters: "Mom, I received a power of attorney. The account was opened. The money was transferred." He quickly photographed everything on his phone. Time was running out. Then he carefully closed the files, deleted the traces of opening, and returned the laptop to its place. He also found a file in the cabinet containing a copy of a will in his name. He discovered that Jade had already prepared a document in which he supposedly left her the house and all assets. The signature looked like his, but he knew for sure that he hadn't signed anything like that. "Oh my God, she's already forged this," he thought coldly, and took a photo of the forgery. Andrew decided to take action. He contacted his lawyer and arranged to meet the next day to change the beneficiaries and draw up a new will. The lawyer was surprised, but agreed. They drew up a document that made the charity the primary beneficiary, and that in the event of his death, Mark and Carol were to call the lawyer. "That's just to be on the safe side," he said, and the lawyer nodded. The evening before the planned trip, Jade brought up the topic. "I talked to my mother. She is also glad that we got out to relax. She says that the countryside nature strengthens relationships." Her voice was as light as always. "Did you call your mom?" Andrew asked, watching her face. "Yes," she nodded. "I wanted to see how she was doing." She didn't mention that they had discussed the details. In fact, while Andrew was out getting groceries, Jade locked herself in the bedroom and called Vivian. "Everything is ready," she whispered into the phone. "The house by the lake is booked. Everything is according to plan. He doesn't suspect anything. We'll be there alone. There's almost no connection. No one will disturb us." "Okay, dear," Vivian's calm voice replied. "Don't forget to take the phenobarbital. The dose should be higher. He's a strong man. And make sure he has the will with him. I've already prepared the paperwork for the bank." "Mom," Jade sighed, "he didn't sign the will. I forged the signature like you wanted, but—" She hesitated for a moment. "Don't think he suspects anything. But I'm worried." "There's no time for doubt," Vivian snapped. "We've come too far. How much longer are you going to drag this out? We're taking a risk. Do everything as planned. I'll be there in a day. If anything goes wrong, call me right away." "Okay," Jade said quietly. "I'll do it." When she hung up, a shadow passed through her eyes, like a cloud passing in a clear sky. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, pressing her fingers to her temples. Her heart was beating faster. Andrew's face came into her mind, his smile, the way he had said, "You're the best part of my life." She pushed the memory away, whispering, "It's work." She took the bottle of sleeping pills from the secret drawer, dropped it into her bag, and zipped it up. Meanwhile, Andrew called Mark. "We're leaving tomorrow. Lake house, almost no reception. If I text strikers or stop responding, call the police and come. Michael will be ready too." "Damn," Mark exhaled. "Be careful. Maybe we shouldn't go at all. Say you're sick. Don't take any chances, brother. She'll be suspicious. I have to catch her red-handed. Michael will meet me in town and wait for my call." Andrew spoke quietly but firmly. "I'll take my food, my drink, and coffee, even a cup. I'll be considerate." He knew it sounded like a cheap thriller, but it was reality. "And don't drink anything she offers," Mark repeated. "I'll come to the house as soon as I see the code. Hold on." That night, Andrew barely slept. He wrote a short letter. "Mark, if you're reading this, I'm not back. I have documents, photos in my closet. Give this to the detective. Let justice be done." He hid the letter in a drawer in a desk that Mark knew. In the morning, they loaded their things into the car. A basket of food, a blanket, a bag of clothes. Jade was cheerful, singing along to the radio. The thin, flat shade of her hat cast a shadow over her eyes. Andrew smiled, but a storm raged inside him. The drive to the lake house was no longer a romantic adventure. It was a fight. He looked out the window at the rows of trees and thought, "Now I know the truth. I have allies. I won't let them win." On Friday evening, Andrew and Jade drove out of town. Jade was in high spirits, humming a cheerful tune while driving, telling him what a wonderful holiday they were going to have. Andrew tried to keep up the conversation, although inside he was seething with anxiety. In the trunk was his sports bag, which, in addition to his clothes, contained a tape recorder and a small camera bought that morning. Andrew was determined to record everything that happened, so that later there would be no doubt about Jade and her mother's guilt. The day before the trip, he met Mark under the pretext of a friendly lunch, and, after much hesitation, told him the whole truth. Mark initially refused to believe it, but when he saw a copy of Michael's letter and Andrew's determination, he was horrified. He immediately agreed to help. It was decided that Mark and Michael would follow the couple in their car at a distance, remaining unnoticed. Michael had arrived in Tampa the day before, and wanted to personally participate in the exposure. They also notified Mark's acquaintance, a police detective, of their suspicions. He did not promise an immediate arrest without clear evidence, but assured that the patrol would be ready to go to the lake at the first call. Andrew glanced at his wife's profile. She looked carefree and happy. What an actress, he thought gloomily. Was there really no real feeling? He pushed away the weakness. There was no doubt now. 2 hours later, the car turned onto a dirt road leading to a secluded lake. Dusk was already gathering as they approached a small wooden house surrounded by tall pine trees. A dock with a moored boat was visible nearby, and the forest was dark beyond the lake. "It's so beautiful here," Andrew marveled, getting out of the car and looking around. The evening air was cool and filled with the scent of pine needles. "Yes, it's just heaven," Jade smiled, unloading her things. No one around, silence. The words hung in the air, and Andrew shuddered involuntarily. No one around, that was exactly what she was counting on. "Let's light the fire and then cook dinner," Jade suggested cheerfully as she entered the house. It was quite cozy inside, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen, and a bedroom. Andrew helped light the fire. Jade put on an apron and got busy in the kitchen, not letting him near. "Go and rest, dear. I'll prepare everything myself. You're tired as it is." Andrew obediently walked away, sitting on the couch in front of the fireplace. From his backpack, he quietly pulled out a USB-sized voice recorder and placed it between the cushions. The device was set to voice activation. He hid the camera on a shelf among the knickknacks, pointing it at the dining table. His heart was pounding. Had he done everything right? There would be no second chances. "Andrew," Jade called from the kitchen. "Will you set the table? It's almost ready." He shuddered. "Yes, sure." In the kitchen, Jade was stirring something in a saucepan. On the table were plates, candles, an open bottle of red wine, and 2 glasses. Andrew made a mental note. He would not touch the wine under any circumstances. A few minutes later, the couple were sitting down to dinner. Jade had prepared a fragrant stew. She raised her glass. "To us, may this weekend be wonderful." Andrew clinked glasses after just taking a sip. Jade drank hers almost in one gulp and immediately poured another, and poured him just a little more. "Eat, dear. Tell me how you like the food." The stew was really good, and Andrew ate with gusto, trying not to show his excitement. About half an hour passed. Jade looked at her husband carefully. "You're so quiet. Maybe some more wine?" "No, no, that's enough." He waved it off. "My head's starting to hurt." He pretended to rub his temples. He already had a plan in his head, to play the role of someone gradually losing consciousness. Jade's eyes narrowed slightly. "Head? Maybe you should go outside for some fresh air." Andrew nodded. "Perhaps. Something is spinning." He stood up, deliberately swaying as if he was losing his balance. Jade immediately jumped up. "Be careful. Let me help." She put her arm around him, leading him to the sofa. "Sit down. I'll bring some water." Andrew sank down onto the sofa, his heart pounding. "She took the bait," flashed through his mind. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. A moment later, he heard his wife's hurried steps not toward him, but past him toward the exit. Andrew squinted as Jade slipped out onto the porch, pulling out her phone. He stood up quietly and crept closer to the door, trying not to give away his presence. "Yeah, it seems to have worked," he heard Jade whisper. Almost unconscious. Come quickly." Andrew's heart sank. She was calling her mother. He returned to the sofa and assumed the fainting position again. A minute later, Jade returned with a glass of water. "Drink this, it will make you feel better." She supported the back of his head, bringing the water to her lips. Andrew took a sip and pretended he couldn't take any more. "Thank you. I guess I need to lie down." "Of course, honey," Jade sang, a cold edge to her voice. "You know, let me help you get some fresh air. You'll come to your senses faster there." Andrew mumbled something vague. Jade, surprisingly easily, slung his arm over her shoulders and lifted him up. "Let's go, step by step." It flashed through Andrew's mind that this wasn't the first time she had done this, skillfully leading a drunk man. He moved his legs deliberately heavily. Jade led him out onto the porch. Night had fallen on the lake. Cicadas were chirping in the darkness. The stars had already come out in the sky. Moonlight shimmered on the water at the dock. Andrew saw the faint outline of a car parked in the distance on the dirt road. It must be Mark and Michael's car. That meant Vivian hadn't arrived yet, or they would have warned him. "Look how beautiful it is," Jade said softly in his ear. "Maybe we should go to the pier and take a closer look." Andrew hummed in agreement. Jade led him confidently down the path to the wooden deck of the dock. The boards creaked slightly underfoot. Cold water lapped gently against the pilings. "There's a fresh breeze here. Stand up straight," Jade instructed, settling Andrew down at the edge. He forced himself to lean limply against the railing. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the darkness. A car was approaching the house. Jade perked up. "Oh, Mom's here. Great." Andrew continued to feign semi-consciousness, although his heart was beating so hard that it seemed Jade could hear it. The car stopped. Vivian jumped out with a flashlight in her hand. "What's wrong with him?" she asked quietly, approaching the pier. "Almost asleep," Jade chuckled coldly. "I added a whole dose of sleeping pills to his glass." Vivian smirked. "Well, it's time to finish the job. You know what to do." Andrew felt Jade's hands tighten on his back. It was now or never. He sat up abruptly and stepped away from the railing, slipping out of her grip. "Enough," he said loudly, retreating to a safe distance. Jade froze in surprise, and Vivian froze in surprise, squinting at the unconscious. "What the—" "It's over, Jade," Andrew was shaking, but holding firm. "I know everything. About Michael, about that old man. And the police already know, too." There was a deafening silence for a few seconds, only the splash of the lake echoing Andrew's heartbeat. Then Jade laughed softly, a raspy laugh. "Bravo. What a number." She took a step towards Andrew. "So you've sniffed it all out, my love? So what now? Do you think anyone will take your word for it?" Vivian supported, standing on the other side. "You have no evidence, boy. We didn't do anything wrong. You never know." The wife brought her husband to relax. He drank too much wine, went out for a walk. "And fell into the lake," Jade finished venomously. "An accident. That happens, right?" Andrew took another step back, noticing movement out of the corner of his eye near Mark's car. Someone was already running toward the pier. "It won't work. Everything you said is recorded," he answered firmly, pointing to the phone sticking out of his jacket pocket. "And there's a camera over there. You can't get away." For a moment, confusion and fear flashed in Jade's eyes, but Vivian tore off the mask first. Her face twisted in anger. "You pathetic bastard," she hissed, pulling a pistol out of her pocket. "You think you outsmarted us?" Andrew froze, staring down the black barrel. Jade also pulled out a thin, long knife that gleamed in the moonlight. "We'll have to change the plan, Mom," she said coldly. "He'll drown, if not from the wine, then from the bullet wound." "Stop!" came a cry from the shore. Michael was running towards the pier with a lantern in his hand, and Mark was running a little behind. "Drop your weapons." Vivian was distracted for a moment, squinting at the approaching figures. "Your mother." She cursed and immediately fired in the direction of those running. There was a whiff of gunpowder, and a bullet whistled off into the darkness. Michael dove for a barrel on the shore, and Mark fell flat on the deck, avoiding the next shot. Andrew, taking advantage of the confusion, lunged at Jade. She yelped in surprise, but managed to raise her hand with the knife. The blade slashed Andrew's shoulder, a sharp pain that flared like fire. He gritted his teeth and knocked the knife out of her hand with a blow. Jade jumped back, hissing like a wild cat. "I hate it." Vivian rushed to her daughter. "Let's go," she shouted, pointing the gun at Andrew. But shouts were already heard from the shore. "Police, drop your weapons." Literally a second later, flashing lights illuminated the pier. It turned out that Detective Mark had also rushed after him, and now jumped out from behind the trees along with two officers. Vivian assessed the situation. The escape route was cut off. She tugged at Jade's arm. Into the water. Suddenly, both women simultaneously jumped into the black surface of the lake from the opposite side of the pier. There was a splash. "They're trying to swim away," Mark shouted, standing up. The police rushed to the boat. "Stop. Swim out with your hands up." Andrew, bleeding from his shoulder, also ran to the edge of the pier. In the moonlight reflection, two heads were visible, floating away from the pier toward the darkening wooded shore. Suddenly, one of the figures jerked and disappeared under the water. The second, Jade, judging by the scream, began flailing her arms. "Mom, Mom, no." The water began to churn, but soon calmed down. Vivian was nowhere to be seen. Jade continued to desperately call for her mother, swimming back to the place. At this point, a boat with police officers was approaching. They pulled out a distraught Jade, who did not resist, only shouting something incoherent about sharks and currents. Andrew stood there, dumbfounded. It was all over. Vivian had drowned, either in a cramp or by being hit underwater. Jade had been arrested. He caught his breath and felt his legs give way. "Hold on, buddy." Mark grabbed him under his healthy arm. "A doctor," he shouted somewhere to the side. Michael came up from the other side, supporting Andrew. "It's all right, boy. You acted like a real hero," he said quietly. Andrew shook his head, feeling tears welling up in his eyes, either from pain or relief. "We're alive," he whispered. He looked out at the lake, where the police were dragging Vivian's lifeless body onto the shore. Jade stood handcuffed on the dock next to him, her wet hair plastered to her pale face. She was no longer the enchanting beauty or the confident huntress. She was a pathetic, trembling woman who knew the game was up. And for the first time, Andrew saw real emotion on her face, horror and despair. But it wasn't pity for this woman that filled his heart. It was bitterness at who she had become. He turned away. In the distance, the sirens of an ambulance and additional patrol cars wailed, approaching the place where ordinary people had triumphed over evil. A month had passed since the events on the lake, events that journalists later called a romantic affair that ended in a shootout. Newspapers published photographs of patrol cars in front of a house by the water, and news channels discussed an amateur video showing a boat fishing for a string of silver bubbles, evidence that Vivian had disappeared somewhere beneath the dark waves. For Andrew, all this was not a sensation, but a painful memory, to which were added pain in the shoulder and nightmares. The wound on the shoulder healed, leaving only a thin scar, a reminder of that night. The doctor removed the bullet, prescribed a course of antibiotics, and said, "You are lucky that the bullet went through." Andrew looked at the stitches and thought, "How many times will this scar remind me of her?" He still woke up in the middle of the night, remembering the flash of the gun, the loud splash of water, and screams. Sometimes he heard Jade's voice in his dreams. "I will fix everything. Just let me go." Jade was in custody awaiting trial. She was charged with attempted murder, fraud, forgery, money laundering, and a number of other serious crimes. The lawyer provided by the state tried to reduce the sentence, citing the mental pressure that her mother exerted on her. But the prosecutor's office collected all possible evidence: Andrew's testimony, Michael's, other testimonies, journals. Vivian's body was never found after a long search. Presumably, it sank in the deep waters of the lake. The search operation took 3 days. Divers examined the bottom, but only found part of the phone case and scraps of fabric. Therefore, Jade had to be tried alone. Andrew agreed to testify against his ex-wife. He still couldn't believe what he had been through, but the support of his friends helped him hold on. Mark visited him almost every day, bringing him fresh news, distracting him with conversation. They went to a therapist together, recommended by his lawyer. The specialist helped Andrew cope with feelings of guilt and betrayal. In the therapist's chair, Andrew said out loud for the first time, "I still love the person I need to hate, and I'm ashamed." The therapist said, "That's normal. In love, we are attracted not only to reality, but also to our projections. You need to let go of this projection." Michael also stayed in town until the trial was over. They often met in cafes, discussing the progress of the case. Michael turned out to be a kind, intelligent man who had transformed from a former victim into a mentor. His own scars, physical and emotional, helped Andrew understand that there is life after trauma. Their joint efforts finally paid off. Justice was to prevail. The police, thanks to his documents and the folder he found on Jade's laptop, uncovered a whole network of fake passports and accounts. It turned out that mother and daughter had traveled under 4 different names, that they had Australian, French, and Argentine documents. Once, during interrogation, Jade, when confronted with the facts, only shrugged. "We did what we thought was right. The world is unfair. We were just taking what was ours." Her face was cold, and there was not an ounce of regret in her words. On the day of the preliminary hearing, Andrew saw Jade for the first time since the events. The courtroom was crowded, smelling of polished wood and damp papers. Reporters sat nearby with notepads, and police officers came up to them every now and then, warning them not to take photos. His heart sank. She was sitting in the defendant's cage, in a prison uniform, exhausted, her eyes dull. Her black hair was now streaked with gray, her face was sallow. No trace of the gorgeous, confident woman he had fallen in love with. When their eyes met, Jade suddenly rushed to the partition, grabbing the bars, trying to say something. "Andrew, Andrew, please." Her voice was hoarse, not like before. She seemed to want to say something to justify herself. Her lips were trembling. Maybe she was going to say, "I loved you," or "It's all Mom," or simply, "Don't leave me." We will never know. The guards jerked her back. The rules forbade contact. Andrew turned away, holding back a lump in his throat. This scene reminded him of all those moments when she looked at him with the same eyes, only then there was tenderness in them, now despair. What did she want? Forgiveness, help, or try to convince him of her love again? It didn't matter now. The hearing was quick. The prosecutor laid out the charges, one after another. Jade's lawyer tried to get her bail lowered, citing Jade's cooperation. The judge, a gray-haired, tired-faced man, reviewed the evidence, including Andrew's recordings at the Lake of Vivian talking about phenobarbital, testimony from Mark, Michael, and others, and ordered the full trial to begin in a month. In the meantime, Jade remained in custody without bail. After the meeting, Andrew, who was leaving the hall, having been bombarded with questions from journalists, "Mr. Harper, what did you feel? How are you feeling?" was approached by a short gray-haired man in an expensive black coat, the brother of that very elderly millionaire who died several years ago. He took off his hat and looked Andrew straight in the eyes. "I wanted to shake your hand, Mr. Harper," he said with feeling, holding out his palm. "You are a hero. Thanks to you and your courage, my brother's memory will be partially restored. The world will know the truth about that woman." His eyes were shining, but not with tears. There was gratitude and sadness in them. Andrew accepted the handshake sheepishly. "Thank you. I just couldn't do otherwise. If it weren't for Michael's letter and the help of my friends, I wouldn't have coped." The man nodded. "Not many in your place would have found the strength to go through this. I am proud to know you. My brother was a trusting man. He was deceived. It is good that you were able to stop her." Andrew smiled gratefully. He had been called a hero several times before by journalists, colleagues, and now by complete strangers. He felt uneasy with the word. Yes, he had stood his ground, but at the cost of a broken heart and shattered illusions. However, if the result had been saving lives and punishing criminals, then it had all been worth it. After the hearing, he walked out of the courthouse into the courtyard. Michael came over and put his arm around Andrew's shoulders. "I certainly think you're a hero. Not only did you save your own life, but I'm sure you prevented future casualties. Thank you." His eyes were filled with genuine gratitude. It was a special brotherhood, bound not by blood, but by survival experience. "Thanks to all of us," Andrew countered. "Without your warning and Mark's support, I would have been lost." Mark, who was standing nearby, laughed, diffusing the situation. "Well, I was just out for a walk," he joked, referring to his last-minute arrival at the lake. "But seriously, my friend, you're incredibly brave. Not everyone can fool a couple of killers like that. He nudged Andrew with his elbow. Andrew shook his head. If it weren't for you, he didn't continue. His friends already knew what he meant. That evening, the trio gathered at Mark's house. Carol set the table like home, baked chicken, mashed potatoes, arugula salad with parmesan. They ordered a cake from a bakery where the icing said, "Here's to a new life," and a picture of a small anchor, a symbol of reliability. This evening was different from their meetings in cafes while waiting for the trial. For the first time in a long time, Andrew felt real peace. They talked about everything, about the new season of their favorite TV series, about Mark's youngest daughter, who began to draw portraits, about a funny article where bowling was described as meditation. At some point, the conversation faltered, and Andrew, looking at his friend's smiles, quietly said, "You know, I thought that after everything that happened, I'd never trust anyone again." He hesitated, searching for the words. "But now I see that there are still good people around, and they're the ones that make life worth living." He looked at Michael and Mark, then at Carol. "You saved me. I don't know how to thank you." Carol smiled softly. "We are always there, Andrew. You are our friend, and it is important to us that you are happy." Michael raised his glass of lemonade. "I propose a toast to new chapters of life, and to the real heroes of our time, ordinary people who are not afraid to fight evil, and to the fact that this nightmare is over." They all clinked glasses. The glass clinked softly. Andrew took a sip, feeling the warmth of the friendly hearts around him. His eyes grew moist, but he allowed himself to smile. Somewhere deep inside, the ghost of pain and betrayal still lived, but it no longer controlled it. The evening continued with laughter and conversation. Mark turned on an old music player, and a song they had listened to in college came on. Carol suggested a board game. Michael said he wanted to start a community fund to help victims of fraud after the trial. Andrew promised to help. The topic of the trial disappeared, as if washed away by a warm summer rain. That night, lying in bed, Andrew couldn't sleep for a long time. He went through the events of the last months like a movie reel, trying to figure out where the point of no return had been. Jade's face floated before his eyes as he had seen it for the first time, an open smile, shining eyes. He sighed bitterly. He wanted to believe that somewhere in that smile there had been at least a drop of sincerity. Maybe at some point, when she laughed at his jokes, she had actually felt warmth. Maybe, but even if not, it didn't matter anymore. On his nightstand was a letter from his lawyer, notifying him that his changes to his will had been finalized. He smiled, ironically, remembering the panic he had felt signing the papers under Vivian's pressure. Now the paper was a symbol of freedom, not shackles. His banks were back under full control. He decided that he would donate some of the proceeds to Michael's foundation, so that the evil they had tried to do with him would turn into good. "Goodbye, Jade," he thought, letting go of the memory like a boat sailing away into a foggy morning. There was no anger in his farewell, only weariness and a little sadness. He knew that somewhere there were probably other people who could still become victims, so he would put his energy into preventing that. A new life awaited him. He wanted to go to the mountains, which he had planned at the beginning of their romance. He wanted to return to bowling, to hiking, maybe to find love again, not right away, but when he was ready. He was determined to live it honestly, bravely, and with dignity like a true hero of his own story. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.